Well, of course, it's a Super Bowl week here in Kansas City, and we are getting angles and perspectives from all across the NFL. Michael Lombardi joining us. He is the host of the Lombardi Line on the VSiN Sports Network. It's great to have him on here in Kansas City. Michael, good morning. Thanks so much for the time. We appreciate it.
Good morning to you. You guys got to be excited. Here we are again.
Here we are again. You know, Michael, obviously, for those that don't know, you're a former general manager, three-time Super Bowl winning NFL executive. When you look at the blueprint that Kansas City has going right now, why is this thing so well beyond the obvious of Patrick Mahomes?
Well, I think this year is really their greatest year because they don't have the best team. And they had not been very good during the regular season. You know, we saw Christmas Day when, you know, Patrick threw an interception. They tried to run a trick play, and the Raiders completed one pass after this first quarter and still beat them after they beat them soundly in Las Vegas. So when Andy changed the way they were going to play, more runs with Pacheco, trying to dink and dunk the ball down the field, he asked Mahomes to play a different game than he was playing. And being the great player that Patrick is, and being the team player that Patrick is, he said, sure, I'd rather win than have stats. And I think this is really symbolic of their team. They've played to the strength of their team, their defense. You know, they've only given up 14 points, and they've only scored 23. I mean, this is not going to be a blowout game. This isn't going to be up the field game, but this is going to be a game where if they play their style, which they've played since the Cincinnati game in Kansas City, it's proven to be very effective.
You know, Michael, I've heard you talk about this on your show, and that is that this team is just, it's different offensively, a lot of what you alluded to since that loss to the Raiders on Christmas. Why do you think that was kind of this awakening for this team, and was it awakening for maybe Andy Reid as well in terms of how he views this offense and what it needs to do to win games?
You know, I often think of a great quote by Churchill. They asked Churchill in the 40s why he wasn't able to be the prime minister until the Germans started bombing London. And he said, well, fear does the work of reason, you know, and yes. I think fear does the work of reason here. I mean, fear of not being a Super Bowl contender, fear of not being the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs, fear of not having a chance to win, reasoned with the players. And obviously, look, we know this. Andy Reid loves to call pass plays. I mean, Eric Bieniemy called 637 pass plays in Washington last year and was proud of it and said Andy would love that I called this many passes even though they didn't win any games, right?
Yeah.
But what Reid hates more than calling run plays is losing. And so fear did the work of reason. And he understands the team. He understands that he can't rely on certain things in the offense that he would like to, and he used his vast knowledge of offensive football to craft an offense that's reminiscent of his early days in Philadelphia or even his Alex Smith days in Kansas City and just work the ball down the field.
You will say that this is not who Andy wants to be, but this is who Andy knows this team is and who it has to be to win.
No question. And that's the mark of a great coach. I mean, you know, Andy likes to be able to go up and down the field, 8 drives, 40 points, but he knows he can't make those one-play drives. He knows Kelsey's not the same player he once was, whether it's the injury, whether it's the age. He knows he doesn't have Tyreek Hill on the outside. You know, he knows the defense doesn't fear his receivers. He knows he drops a lot of passes. And he also knows more than anything that the offensive line that they spent money on to try to repair isn't as good as they hoped it would be. Right, Donovan Smith and Jawan Taylor haven't really played to the level earlier in the year that they needed them to. I mean, look, every game Donovan Smith was lined up like he was on the punt team on the wing. And so they fixed all that. They got that coach. That's what you do during the season. You recognize your problems, you fix them, and you move on to the next problem. And so I'm saying this with great, great respect towards Reid and the staff because they've seen their deficiencies, and they've overcome them.
Michael Lombardi, Lombardi Line on VSiN, former GM, 3-time Super Bowl winning NFL executive, joining us on KCMO in Kansas City. You mentioned the defense. Steve Spagnuolo, NFL fans know him from a very successful tenure, but when you look back on his career, where will this year stack up, and is this defense in some ways being underappreciated because of Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes kind of stealing the headlines?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think everybody knows that, look, They've been very effective defensively. They know that they've made timely plays. Look, Buffalo had the ball for 78 plays, 37 minutes. They averaged 4.8 per pass. They averaged 4.7 per run. Had an opportunity to win the game and missed a field goal, or at least send the game into overtime. They could have. Diggs dropped catches a pass, but I think more than anything is they've been very opportunistic. They've made the key plays that they've had to make in the red zone. Interception against Baltimore in the red zone. Stopping Buffalo in the red zone, creating plays that they needed to create. So, look, I think one thing we know about football, for all the conversation that, Tom Brady won every Super Bowl, right? That Belichick had little to do with all the Super Bowls. It was all Brady. We realize, and Chief fans realize now after watching this team, it's football's a three-dimensional game. It takes really good It takes really good offense. It takes really good defense, and it takes good special teams. Remember, the game you lose to Patriots in Kansas City, that defense wasn't very good, and Mahomes couldn't win that game by himself. So eventually, the defense has matched, and football has to have complementary elements to it, and this Chief team does.
Mm-hmm. And how important is it the way that this team has navigated this salary cap situation? Is far more complex than myself included realize in terms of making this thing work. When you got a quarterback making Mahomes money, you're letting Tyreek Hill go, you got to hit it in the draft, and from Pacheco to a bunch of other guys, this team has hit it in the draft. How about how Brett Veach and that front office has navigated the monetary side of putting a team together?
Well, I think it's tremendous, and what you got to love about them, too, is, look, they draft Edwards-Helaire in the first round, and yet they realize Pacheco's the better player. And so they play Pacheco. They're not committed to what they think. They're committed to what is best. And you got to marvel at that, right? You got to really, really marvel. That's the great thing. When you stand in front of your team and say, look, the best players are going to play, and then you play a guy who's not as good as the guy behind him, you lose credibility. Reed's not doing that. He clearly is saying the best players play. Mm-hmm. And if you're not one of the best players, you're not going to play.
Yeah. Michael Lombardi's on KCMO. Your first job, for people that don't know, was with the 49ers as a scout, and I know that you're a guy who doesn't think Brock Purdy gets enough credit. There's a lot of Iowa State fans in the Kansas City area who will say, hey, we saw this guy, we knew he had potential. I don't know if anybody saw this coming, but what has made Brock Purdy more than the game manager that some want to portray him to be?
Well, because people that say it don't have a clue. They don't really understand it. Bill Walsh used to say this all the time. Very few people can evaluate the quarterback, and even fewer can coach him. All these idiots that are calling him a game manager have no idea what it really takes to play a quarterback. I mean, it's really, if you listen to the worldwide leader every day, you're going to get dumber. You are going to get dumber.
Oh, that's so true. Now, for the Chiefs, you look at this Niners defensive line. I know you've alluded to it, and for those that haven't watched, it hasn't played great. So how does that factor into this game on Sunday, and how can the Chiefs take advantage?
Well, I think this is a game about strategy, right? I think this is a game about the script. Andy Reid, and since that game I talked about on Christmas Day, they've changed who they are, right? And one of the things they've done is done a great job of with this script. They've gotten the points on every single first drive that they've had over the last 4 games. In the playoffs, in every game, they've scored on the opening drive, whether it's a field goal or a touchdown. And they have been very good in the first quarter. Now, they haven't been great in the second half because they don't have a lot to adjust to. But they have been very good in the first quarter and first drive. This is where the game's going to come out to. They're going to have to. Remember, the last time they played them, they scored 21 points in the fourth quarter. They gained over 200 yards in the second half in that game. They had to come from behind in that game. And so they gained 242 yards in the second half in that game. So this is a game where it's going to be the opposite. They're going to need to start fast because if they have to play from behind and they have to go back to the Chiefs offense that was drop back pass that we saw earlier in the year, that we saw against the Raiders, they won't protect against this front.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Michael Lombardi, host of the Lombardi Line on VSiN and a former GM, 3-time Super Bowl winning executive. Michael, do we have to wait for later in the week for your prediction on the game?
Yeah, I'm still working on it. I haven't quite got there. I go back and forth. It seems too easy to just say the Chiefs are playing better. And, I think Kyle Shanahan's got to have something in store. This is a game where a strategy, as I said, is really going to play a huge part because, the Chiefs are not going to run away from anybody the way they play, and the Niners haven't been able to play good enough defense. So I think a lot of things have to change for the Niners to win the game.
Michael, we'll be following. We appreciate you hopping on with us here in Kansas City. Have a great week.
Thank you so much.
All right, Michael Lombardi, good stuff. Always great to have him on, and we appreciate his time here on KCMO Talk Radio.